Peter and his companions were very sleepy. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory. Whatever does it mean to be fully awake? Is that something that happens to us after we stop at Starbucks in the morning? We are fully conscious, I suspect. That can help us to be more conscious of things. Many people need that caffeine. But what do you think Luke means when he relates this story as he does? That suddenly, both in consciousness and perhaps in another way, Peter, James, and John are fully awake. Do you think that there could be more to it than just consciousness, that perhaps they are somehow in a new spiritual condition? Is that possible? Because of what they are taking in, they are on a whole new level of spiritual awareness, fully awake. And as a result of that condition, they are able to see God's glory. Now, I think that has real possibility, to have the spiritual condition of being fully awake. And you know what is really wonderful is that I believe that Jesus reveals, and the gospel witness affirms, and the testamental affirmations of 39 books of what we call Old Testament give history to and awareness of the fact that each one of us, as children of God, there's that phrase again, that we can too become fully awake. And that in that spiritual condition available to all of us, we have the ability to see in ways we have not before God's glory. Now, in what we call Old Testament, that experience was given the name Shekinah, the shining. That there would come that moment when men and women filled with God's Spirit, acknowledging God's presence in a powerful way in an overwhelming moment of transformation. That there would be this sense that could not be described in any other way than just a shining, a Shekinah, where their countenance changed. It happened to Moses in such a way that for years later, according to Exodus, when Moses would speak with people after his encounter with the Creator and Torah, he had this shining that was so bright that he had to cover his face with a veil, with a cloth, because people had immediate macular degeneration. They couldn't stand to look at him. It was like their eyes suddenly had cataracts and they were looking into a window. But the great message in all of this is that for each of us, while it not happen like to us maybe like Moses or Jesus on the mountain, There is a spiritual condition, I believe, that we can experience and hopefully will, because we cultivate it in ourselves, of being fully awake. And in that condition, we can see God's glory, and because of it, are able to live life as it comes to us in our daily experience, which many times can be very, very difficult. But it's in such times that we remember, or we rely upon, or we hope in that fully awake condition, so that we are not overwhelmed by darkness or consumed by despair. Now, there are two things that work against, I believe, our ability to be fully awake. And they are both enormously troublesome. We are living in a world where one of the greatest mitigating factors of human beings experiencing spiritual awakeness, being fully awake, we are living in a time when one of those forces that works against that is a secular, spiritual indifference. Whatever. It's kind of like a byword for so many folk. Whatever. Indifference. And while there's full consciousness, we hope, there is such an indifference to a spiritual vitality. And what happens is, in part, is that people, some become capable out of their indifference of doing such things as mass murder. Whatever. I don't care about anybody else. It's all about me. I want to write my manifesto at 21. My manifesto of what I think is taking over our country. And as a result of that, I am going to go out and just randomly shoot people. And folks run around, whether in Dayton or in El Paso, and we all do this. Well, what was the motive? What was the motive? And one of the questions is not motive. What was the condition of that shooter? A spiritual condition that is so ambivalent that there's no concern for another life. And I can randomly, can you imagine this? Just randomly take it. A little child, oh, I can shoot. It is a horrific problem in our country and our world that we've got this growing secular indifference, that when it becomes extreme, these things happen because folk basically only care about the reflection in their mirror. And these enormous tragedies occur. And it's not benign spiritual indifference, because all kinds of satanic things take over. And don't you just hate it? That attitude, and I catch myself saying it. Whatever. That works against spiritual vitality, being fully awake. And when we're not fully awake, we don't have the ability to see God's presence in a way that's always around us. And the second thing that works against a full spiritual, being spiritually awake, I think, is religion. Think about how many spirits are put to sleep by religion. We can go through the experience of worship, and as wonderful as it might be, and there are many, many folks where it's the same week after week after week after week. We say the same basic words. We go through the same form of ritual. We do the same things, and in some Christian traditions it is absolutely the same all of the time. Nothing varies, not even the inflection of the leader of worship. And we fall asleep. And we go through things by rote because it's religion. And religion is something that human beings create. That doesn't mean it's bad. It can be very wonderful. It sets a tone, in its best sense, can set a tone where we are made aware of in our surroundings and all those other things of an openness to God's presence within us and receiving new inspiration. But so often religion is such a mind and heart dulling experience because it's human beings that did it. Do you get inspired by folks who sit around and write church law? Do you get inspired by theology? When was the last time you jumped up for joy for the doctrine of original sin? That's all stuff human beings do. And that's what love is for. This incarnate presence of Jesus, who in his own time and in ours comes into the world to be an enlivening experience of God's Spirit within us, who awakens our hearts and our spirits so that we can be fully awake to see, to catch glimpses of God's presence. Because that sighting of God's kingdom, that glimpse, enables us to live life with a marvelous sense of joy and courage. To catch a glimpse of God's kingdom. Now, we're going to have communion in just a little bit. And you know what? It's not religion. We will go through familiar ritual, but its purpose is not the ritual. We will say words that will be very familiar to many of you, but that's not the power of it. It's what love is for. When Jesus offered the first, what we now call sacrament, where he was this vital spirit that awakened those around him to be able to see the glory of God, all he asked of us is that when we gather, we remember him. Never once did he ever, in my knowledge of the scriptural tradition and the life and teachings of Jesus, do I remember or think about or read Jesus ever teaching theology or enforcing a theological doctrine. Thanks be to God, he didn't. All he said was, remember me. And what's that mean? Every time you take the bread, will you remember that the bread comes out of the tradition of God liberating people, both corporately and individually, to set their spirits free, to see new things and dream new dreams and hold on to a vision of what life can be like for you and for others in the kingdom? And Jesus says, remember me. And in the same manner, Jesus took the cup. It was at the Seder table. It was called the cup, and still is, of Elijah, the prophet. The cup of expectation, of messianic presence. What's that mean? Of this Spirit of God that would come in through an open door, figuratively, but the open door of your spirit, and enter into your life and make it new. And give you courage and hope that freedom and the Messiah has come and is alive in you. And Jesus says, will you remember me when you take that cup? That's what this is about? That I've asked you to love one another as I've loved you? Can you imagine anything more energizing to think about? And to be fully awake to believe that we can see God's presence in our midst when we share this way. Or when we gather in any way to remember Jesus. Or express our faith. Because it's not what human beings have written down that it is. It's what Jesus revealed in his life. Now, here is something else we think about, and then we're going to gather and have this time together. One of the great things that we believe in this light, or we approach in our faith life, our spiritually alive selves, is that we believe that when we gather at the table, it's not only us, it's the communion, the greater communion of saints. That means that all those that we have loved and lost, all those who are now a part of the church triumphant and universal, all those folks who have gone on before, that their life, the integrity of their gift as a creature of God, that they shared with us during their physical time on earth, that all of those spirits somehow in God's kingdom gather with us. And in remembering Jesus, with our spiritually awake selves, we open ourselves to the possibility that we will with them see glimpses of the kingdom, as perhaps we once saw those glimpses through them. Do you believe that? And those glimpses of the kingdom, they save our lives and strengthen our lives for the living of our days. Do you believe that when we gather today, Dot Lauder will be here? I do. A woman who, as she lived her life in this community and in this particular family of faith, was a woman of great ability in gardening and a trained nurse, a lover of people, whose life will be celebrated, remembered here a week from Saturday at 11 o'clock. But do you believe that Dot is here in spirit, the communion of saints, strengthening us, enabling us to glimpse the kingdom through her? One of the lines in her obituary touched me deeply. reflecting on her life as a gardener and as a caring person, the line was this: she nurtured, think about this, she nurtured the plants and the people in her life with utmost care. Don't you glimpse the kingdom through that affirmation, that life? That the kingdom of God is that for all of us, held in store. That there's a God who cares for us to the utmost, intends for our good for the utmost, seeks our flourishing and our flowering. And is that not a glimpse of the characteristic of the kingdom that enriches us? Do you believe that Maggie Scharf will be here in this time together? She sat at the organ for so many years where Warren, her husband, directed the choir, and she filled this place with music. Do you think that the kingdom of God is reflected in a life like that, that enables us to catch a glimpse of the music of the spheres? That somehow this universe is ultimately harmony, not disjointed screaming? Can you catch a glimpse of that by being fully spiritually awake? And I want to share one other name with you this morning that perhaps you know. The late Tom Greer. Tom was, before his death, the editor of The Plain Dealer. A remarkable man. He started out his career in a number of different communities as he began his journalism career as a sports writer. And he finally, after coming to Cleveland, worked through the ranks of the editorial divisions and all the management of newspaper, and was the city editor and then the editor of The Plain Dealer. Tom told me a story before his death that was so overwhelming and a glimpse of the kingdom, its characteristics and its meaning. Tom had the job, as so many of us one day do or have had, the responsibility of caring for all of his mother's physical effects following her death. And Tom told me about the experience of going to her home and going through that arduous emotional task of caring for her earthly belongings and the things that meant a great deal to her. He told me, though, that he went finally to her closet. And in the closet was a little suitcase. And Tom said he opened the suitcase, and as he looked at the contents of it, he fell to his knees, dissolved in tears. In the suitcase, his mother had a newspaper clipping of everything Tom had ever written. Every sports article, every analysis, every editorial, all of it, while she was physically present and able to collect it. All of those things were right there where she treasured them. Didn't mean she agreed with them, and maybe she didn't even know a basketball from a football. but everything that he had ever written, her son whom she loved, was in that box. And I think that's a glimpse of the kingdom. That God holds that for each of us, the book of life. And it's not some book that looks where he or she looks at the book of life and says, oh, you screwed up here, you didn't do things well here, so you're damned, you're saved, all of that kind of theological nonsense and judgment. But a creator who mothers us into life and treasures the gifts that have been given to us, that we use and develop. And we catch that glimpse of the Spirit, and it enables us to live life hoping in a creator and trusting in a creator of that quality, that our lives are meaningful, the universe is purposeful, that as Martin Luther King said indeed in his inspired moments, that regardless of the tragedies, it all bends toward justice. These are glimpses of the kingdom that we can see in the people around us if we are just spiritually awake to catch a glimpse. And as a result, to be a transforming, transfiguring light in a world that is so often dull and dark. You and I, we can brighten it. Let us share this sacrament together.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click Donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.